Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everybody. My name is Yoel Finkelman. I'm the curator of the Judaica collection at the National Library of Israel, and I am pleased and honored to kick off this evening's or this afternoon's event and to introduce Dr. Mirecki, and particularly to say a word or two in addition about what makes me excited about this evening's lecture. First of all, although I have not met Dr. Mirecki before, it's been a pleasure for me to speak to him on the phone this afternoon and to get to know him. He was born and raised in Chicago, earned his doctorate in religious studies at Harvard University in 1986, and studied the Dead Sea Scrolls under the famous Frank Moore Cross and Don Strugnell. He taught at the Near Eastern Studies Department at the University of Michigan before moving to the University of Kansas, where he's been a professor since 1989. Having recently retired from the university, he continues to research and write, particularly in his primary fields of interest, papyrology, ancient Greek and Coptic manuscripts. He studied and published manuscripts and collections in the United States, England, Ireland, and Berlin. And what's lovely to me about tonight's evening is, first of all, it's nice to see scholars work on something that's a little bit serendipitous and maybe even a tiny bit outside of their comfort zone, because suddenly a document appears in a library, a document appears in a collection, raises the interest of a scholar, and the snowball begins to grow from there. And the second thing that excites me about this evening is the way in which it exemplifies how changing technologies, images of manuscripts, the internet, the changing communications technology allow for international cooperations and cross-fertilization between experts. In our particular case regarding this damaged Sefer Torah Torah scroll that had been split at some point in its history and ended up in various different places. The work of Dr. Mirecki in Kansas in coordination with Israel Dubitsky of the National Library of Israel's manuscript department, as well as the world-renowned expertise of Ephraim Caspi, perhaps one of the greatest experts on the history of Torah scrolls in the world, which all happened through exchanging images, exchanging emails, exchanging digital communication, which enabled, in the end of the day, the combination of Dr. Mirecki's work and Ephraim Caspi to identify the lost, separated twins, if you will, of this broken Sefer Torah that had been scattered around the world. And so I turn the microphone over to Dr. Mirecki and thank him in advance for his lecture. After he speaks for about 35 to 40 minutes, I will use the chat feature to read questions from the audience. Feel free to insert questions there when the lecture is over, or even during the lecture itself, because we will get back to them as the evening progresses. Thank you very much, Dr. Mirecki.
Thank you. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Perfect.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your accurate introductory comments, Yoel. I appreciate it. And for the help of everyone else at the National Library. It's an honor to speak to you today. I appreciate the invitation. I have the title, A Damaged Sefer Torah from the 1840 Algerian Pogrom, now in the University of Kansas and Chateau Chantilly, France. And I began work on this interesting manuscript in 2014 and have worked with Ephraim Caspi, much to my delight. So the purpose of my study is to recount my experience in discovering a Sefer Torah now known to have been taken from the synagogue in Medea, Algeria in 1840 during a pogrom against the community following the French invasion of 1830. The scroll is currently divided equally between the rare books collections of the University of Kansas and Chateau Chantilly, north of Paris. My purpose at this point is not philological, but rather focuses on the structure of the scroll, its texts, and scribal conventions. Indicators of its history are evident in physical damage and repair, and the rewriting of text portions. The scroll's date is unknown, but a working hypothesis that Ephraim Caspi and I have decided on at this point is about 1700. As a quick review, here is a map of Algeria with a listing of Jewish communities in the past 2,000 years. And you can see here is Algiers, and 60 kilometers to the south is Media, where the scroll originated from. Historical interest, I found some photographs of synagogues well over a century ago. This is an antique postcard from 1902 of the synagogue in Algiers and the synagogue in Oran in about 1900. This is the only photograph that I've been able to find of the old synagogue in Media, the original home of the scroll we will be looking at. For those of you unfamiliar with the history of Jews in Algeria, I want to have a quick review. As you know, Algeria was ruled by the Ottoman Empire from about 1520. There were Jewish communities throughout the country, with the city of Algiers having the largest number. Internal disputes between Jewish factions continually divided the Jewish population. Up to 500 Jews were massacred in the city of Algiers in 1805 after a leading Jewish politician, Naftali Bushnach, was assassinated by the Ottoman military. His three successors, along with other leading politicians and rabbis, were also executed between 1811 and 1815. The French colonized the country beginning in 1830 with their invasion. Algerian Jews were granted French citizenship in 1870, resulting in anti-Jewish violence escalating between 1881 and 1900, including the looting of synagogues with their Torah scrolls dragged through the streets as banners. Here are two photographs of where the scrolls on the left in Kansas and on the right in Chateau Chantilly originally were joined. The difference in color is due to photography. Sheet 34 is shown in actual color of both half scrolls. Let me say at the start that in 2014, I was teaching a class in the rare books collection at the University of Kansas. And the curator there said to me, "Do you know we have an old Hebrew scroll?" And I said, "What? You have an old Hebrew scroll? Tell me about it." And I got the file, and no one had looked at this scroll since it was acquired by the university in 1969. It had been put away in storage and just forgotten about. So I asked to see the scroll, and having done a lot of papyrological work, I was shocked at what I saw. And I soon realized that the scroll was only half of a Torah scroll. It was torn in half exactly in the middle, damaging the lower edges of sheet 33, which is on the right. And the text there ends at Leviticus 8:24a and sheet 34. And the text at the top begins at Leviticus 8:24b. One of the indicators that these two scrolls were originally one. So the scroll was ripped in half during a pogrom in 1840. The immediate history of the two scrolls after the pogrom remains unknown. They apparently both ended up in France through the work of French military personnel who were about the business of collecting antiquities in North Africa. I began my research on the second half of the scroll in 2014 and became aware of the fact that the location of the scroll's first half was unknown, even if it still existed. So I contacted Yael Oken at the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem for assistance in locating the lost first half of the scroll. Collaboration with Ephraim Caspi began at that time. In the spring of 2018, the library announced to us that it had successfully identified the first half of the scroll in the library of Chateau Chantilly, north of Paris. This is an amazing story in itself, that the library was able to locate the missing half of the scroll, the first half. So let's look at the acquisition of the half scroll now at the Chateau. Here is an aerial photo of part of the estate of Chateau Chantilly, also famous not for its wine, but for a large racetrack and its Chantilly cream. So Henry de Orleans, Duke of Aumale, was appointed captain of infantry at 17 years of age, and you can see his portrait on the right. And he was soon appointed governor of Algeria while still a young man. He was going through Algeria, dealing with military issues, and he was also a collector of rare books. And I found in his diary a comment, the single comment he makes about the scroll. He says, quote, "I took it with my own hands in Media's synagogue in May 1840, when the town had been left to Muslims and the Jews taken away by Abd al-Qadir." So this gives us a secure date on when at least the first half of the scroll was taken out of the synagogue. The Jewish community had been dispersed and was no longer in the synagogue. There's no record on who was in charge of the synagogue. I suppose local Arab Muslim individuals. And he was able to acquire the scroll, probably purchased it from them in May of 1840, right out of the synagogue. So this is important information for us on the origin location of the scroll. And on the left photograph is a photo of Abd al-Qadir, who was a Sufi master and reluctantly took the position of military leader. And he helped evacuate Jewish communities during the crisis. Here is part of the Duke's library at Chateau Chantilly. He was interested in printed volumes of high quality. And you can see the much of his wealth went into collecting rare books. Here's a photograph of myself in the Rare Books Library at the Chateau in March of 2018. They do not have a laboratory in the Chateau, so research conditions were very difficult, as you could see. Not very good lighting, not much space to work. But I was still able to do some initial research and answer some basic questions about the first half of the scroll. In the first half of the scroll, the handle and crown of the original dowels, Trees of Life, are still intact, and they are missing from the Kansas half scroll. So the Kansas half scroll has no original dowel. And you can see on the right-hand photograph, the handle is intact, and there is a metal band around the top of the handle, which we will look at in a moment. The crown of the dowel has been attacked by termites, and the top of it was cracked off. And here is the metal band around the dowel on the right side of the scroll, exhibiting metal artwork with 3 Hebrew texts punched and impressed into the soft metal band around the dowel handle. And perhaps one of you can help me in translating these texts. It looks like on the right, we have a name, perhaps Ben Yaakov, I think. I don't know what the center text says. And I think this text is Solomon. So if you can perhaps have an interest in translating this and helping me with these texts, I would appreciate it. And also palm trees, decorative palm trees around the texts. Why was the Duke of Aumale interested in the half scroll? Why did he bring it back to his chateau in Paris? Well, he was influenced by J.C. Brunet's famous manual for bibliophiles of 1810. Brunet set out several criteria for book collectors, and 3 of his criteria indicate the Medea scroll was a candidate for a serious collector. Very few of the Duke's books were hand-copied manuscripts or even in scroll form. First, Brunet says that the book must be unique in some way or had become so through a twist of fate. And this is certainly the case with our scroll. Second, the book's text must be an important classic. Nothing more classic than Torah. The book's text was old and revered. So I suppose these are Brunet's 3 criteria that influenced the Duke to take the scroll and put it for safekeeping into his collection at the chateau. Now, let me just add that there's no indication that the Duke knew what this scroll was and what texts it contained. We look at it and we say, oh, that's a Torah scroll, but there's no reason to think that he understood what the text was about. He may have had someone, access to someone who could read Hebrew and informed him of it, but in his notes in his diary, he makes no indication that he knew of what the text was. I'd just like to add that in the 1820s and 1830s, of course, we have the decipherment of the famous Rosetta Stone from Rosetta, Egypt, discovered by, coincidentally, a French military unit who was building a fortress in Rosetta. And they came across this large stone, and it turned out to be the key to the translation of hieroglyphs. So by the time the Duke is in Algiers, in Algeria, word has worked itself through the French military to be on the outlook for rare antiquities and to send them back to rare book depositories in France. So the Duke takes the scroll, apparently unaware what it's about, and puts it into his library for safekeeping. But no one in France had worked on it. And as I've mentioned, the other half of the scroll in Kansas sat ignored for about 50 years before I started working on it with Ephraim. Let's turn to the question of the acquisition of the half scroll now at the University of Kansas. And here we have a very different story. For those of you unaware, the University of Kansas is right in the center of the continental United States, in the state of Kansas, Douglas County. The half scroll was acquired by Alpha Owens, 1877 to 1986, at a still unknown time and place. And I found this photograph of Alpha Owens, and the University of Kansas graduation book of 1901. And here she is here she is a young woman about 21 years of age, receiving her BA at the university. And she went on to receive her PhD at Johns Hopkins University in modern language teaching in 1929. Now, the earliest document concerning the scroll is a letter dated to 22 December 1965 from the vice president of the Lawrence National Bank. And Lawrence, Kansas is the town in which the university is situated. And in this letter from the vice president of the Lawrence National Bank is addressed to a librarian at Baker University in Baldwin, Kansas, stating that the bank is the executor of an estate with an old Torah scroll. So the vice president of the bank had no idea what to do with the scroll and what it was about. And he makes a comment in his letter to the librarian that, quote, "It is part of the spoils taken from a synagogue in Algiers when Algeria fell in 1830. I add the Latin word sic, meaning this is an error. It was not taken from the synagogue in Algiers, but the synagogue in Medea, as we now know through the comment from the Duke. The librarian is then asked by the bank vice president for an appraisal figure. So he needs to do his job, find out the value of the scroll, and get on with his work in dispersing the estate. We don't have in the file the response of the librarian on the appraised value of the scroll. Owen's estate then donated the scroll to the Douglas County Historical Society, which presented it to the University of Kansas on 10 December 1969. 9 days later, on 19th of December 1969, the university sent a letter to the Douglas County Historical Society acknowledging reception of the scroll and, for the first time, associating the name of Dr. Alpha Owens with it. It is currently in the Spencer Research Library, which is the rare books collection at the University of Kansas. In an interview published shortly after 1952, Owens said that she traveled widely throughout Europe with her husband, collecting valuable realia material for use in modern language teaching. She mentions her travels throughout Europe, especially in France, but not North Africa as one of her many destinations. So our working hypothesis at this point is that she acquired it somewhere in France. And we've seen that the Duke brought his scroll half to France in 1840. And I'm assuming with Ephraim that Alpha Owens acquired the scroll half, now in Kansas, acquired it somewhere in France at a book sale, or a bookstore or an antique store or something like that, but there's no information on the scroll's file at the university about where she acquired it exactly. And these two scrolls, or these two slides I've shown you with all of this information, reminds us of the value of library research and the keeping of files on the material that they have, because you, as a curator, as a library historian, will be working on an artifact, and you have some material that should be added to the file, and it certainly should be added to the file because it may provide crucial information in the future for someone doing research. So that file that the university has on the Kansas half of the scroll contains a lot of papers, a lot of postcards and other things that at first glance appear to be unimportant, yet they're crucial in understanding the origins of the scroll. Here is the Medea half scroll today, the Kansas half. 33 skin sheets sewn together, 118 text columns, 45 lines per column. And you can see it is in relatively excellent condition, considering its history, but there are problems. Here I am in the Spencer Research Library studying the scroll. Here is a photograph of the extant beginning of the Kansas half scroll, beginning with Leviticus 8:24b. Now, as some of you know, Leviticus 10:46 is the exact center of Torah words. Leviticus 11:42 is the exact center of Torah letters, and Torah contains over 304,000 letters. So it seems to me that the scroll was evenly rolled up on both sides when it was taken out of its cabinet and torn in half. And it appears that the bandits who took the scroll each took their half and made off with it, one ending up in the hands of the Duke of Almali, then in France, and the other ending up somewhere in France to be acquired by Alpha Owens. And you can see some of the damage that has occurred. A lot of soiling. Here is the end of the Kansas scroll, sheet 66, column 232, conclusion of Deuteronomy 34. All 45 lines are inscribed, plus there is a blank column that is ruled. Notice the 3 sets of holes along which the original wooden dowel was attached. And there are no stitching holes along this edge, indicating to us that there was not another blank sheet attached that's now lost. So the scroll is intact when reunited with the French scroll. Here is one of the better sections of scroll in terms of damage and soiling. Sheet 27, columns 95 to 97. So, evidence that the 2 half scrolls were originally one and the same scroll. And this is the list that I had when I went to Paris to look at the Chantilly scroll half. First, the nature and size of the skin sheets. They are of the same type of skin. They have weathered and aged the same way, and they are the same size, down to the millimeter. The design and dimensions of columns and lines are identical. The scribe's hands are the same. There is one scribe that copies most of the scroll, but there is evidence of more than one scribe. And this is difficult to identify, and I rely on Ephraim Cosby's expertise on this issue. But there's one major scribe, and then other scribes come in and take over the copying process, especially in damaged areas, which we will look at momentarily. There is similar damage and uniform wear, so certain types of damage recur throughout both halves of the scroll. And in relation to the damage, there are similar methods of repair, erasures, and rewritten portions of text. The stitching holes on the left edge of column 33 and the right edge of column 34 are in alignment. And this is where the scroll was ripped in half. So these stitching holes line up. Very important, the Chantilly scroll half ends at Leviticus 8:24a, and the Kansas scroll begins at Leviticus 8:24b. So there is no doubt at all that these 2 scrolls are one and the same, and they have been reunited digitally. Here are some observations on traditional text features, especially unusual features of the Hebrew text, indicating traditional customs of scribal activity. First, the famous inverted nuns of Numbers 10, 35 to 36, where the reversed upside down nun letters are used as a framing device for Numbers 10, 35 to 36. These inverted nuns are found elsewhere in Tanakh, only in Psalm 107, and they indicate doubt as to the location of a text. And if you get your Bible and read the paragraph that contains Numbers 10, 35, and 36, you'll see that there is a logical problem in the narrative of the placement of these two verses. So here we find the inverted nuns, which we would expect to find, and they are faithfully being copied by the scribe, who finds them in his exemplar. The scribe is also adding crowns or taggin, which are these little markings, understood to be artistically crowns, over 7 of the 22 letters of the alphabet, essentially found in every sentence throughout the scroll. As you may know, taggin are required in Ashkenazi scrolls, but optional in Sephardic scrolls. And they have mystical meanings in Kabbalah. Some traditional text features, the famous anomalous dots over some letters. And there are 10 cases in Torah that we will look at. In Genesis 16:5, we have an anomalous dot over the yod. So the scribe sees this in his exemplar that he is copying, and he faithfully adds that dot, unaware of its meaning. Genesis 18:19, dots over 4, although I only see 3 letters. In Genesis 19:33, a dot over the vav. Again, the white photographs are from the Paris scroll, and the brown photographs, which are the actual color of the scroll, are from the Kansas scroll. So next is the fourth example, the Genesis 33:4, where we have the anomalous dots over 6 letters. Genesis 37:12 over 2 letters. Numbers 3:39 over 5 letters, and Aaron. So once again, the scribe faithfully sees these dots in his exemplar and copies them. Example 7, Numbers 9:10 over the He, and Numbers 21:30 over the Resh. Example 9, Numbers 29:15 over the Vav. We'll get to this erasure in a moment. Numbers 29:28 over the Lamed, and the following letters. So here's the most extensive example of anomalous dots over 11 letters. And this scribe has faithfully copied all of those dots, unaware of their meaning. Other traditional text features, letters added or omitted. There is an extra vav in the third word of Leviticus 10:13. Numbers 31:2 omits a vav before the third word, so that the text reads afterward and not and afterward. Numbers 32:7, the use of a vav rather than a yod. In the Paris text and the French text, we have large and small letters, which you're probably aware of. A large initial bet indicates the beginning of Torah, Bereshith. Leviticus 11:42, a large vav indicates the middle letter of Torah. So the scribe is aware of why this vav is enlarged. He's at the center of Torah at this point, and his exemplar has such an indication. And a large gimel in Leviticus 13:33, indicating the middle verse of Torah. More, we have large and small letters. In Genesis 4:2-4a, the small he in the last word followed by a paragraph break. So there we see a small letter, a small qaf at Genesis 27:46, a small aleph at Leviticus 1:1, the first word of Leviticus, and a small final yod in Deuteronomy 32:18. So the scribe is following scribal conventions and not departing from those conventions. He's following tradition, not asking the question, why are these letters small? Should I make them large? Should I make them the regular size? He doesn't take that option. He faithfully copies what he sees in his exemplar scroll. We also find the well-known elongated letters at the ends of lines. And I selected this portion of text from the Kansas scroll to show you the elongated letters, but also this line above the top, the scribe is barely able to get his entire text in because he is crowding the letters together, making them very small. And then he has extra space at the following two lines where he enlarges the letters, raising the question whether his exemplar scroll was written in this manner. And he simply copies it. Here we have an erased letter. There is an extra vav erased by dry scraping at numbers 29:15. So the scribe or a later reader or a later corrector identifies that error and erases it by dry scraping. Then we have repaired areas of skin in ink. And there are three methods of rewriting text portions and repairing damaged skin. And this is important because we find these methods in both half scrolls. Method one, a thin skin membrane was removed from a lower margin by razor and then added over damaged area with new text written on it. So here we have a section of text removed, a section of skin removed. The top portion of the skin is lifted off, and while it's still moist, it's pasted over a text which is apparently containing an error. Then the same or another scribe comes in and writes the correct text. And there are many, many examples of this. Here, the scroll was damaged with some type of an angular cut. This is a photograph of the backside of the scroll. And the text was then damaged. So membrane was put over the scroll, sort of like a Band-Aid to secure the manuscript, and then to secure the skin, and then new text was written over the portion. And you'll notice that these added texts are often done with a different type of pen and not in the same quality as the rest of the text. So it looks like these are being added by a later writer, a later scribe. Here's another example. You can see the membrane glued on to the damaged portion of text and text rewritten. Notice that the tag-in are not added in the repaired section. This is the largest skin membrane that has been removed from a lower margin by a razor and adhered to a damaged area with new text written on it. And Ephraim Cosby has identified this as a secondary hand, that it's not the same scribe writing most of the scroll. So we have a large skin membrane adhered to this portion. We don't know what happened. It apparently is a section of text that contains some errors. Another method of repairing text portions is to scrape off with a razor the damaged skin surface containing the text in error, and then cover that damaged area with a brown dye, let it dry, and then rewrite the correct portion of text. You can see many examples in both halves of the scroll. Method 3 of recopying text is simply to scrape off with the razor the damaged skin surface, which is then not repaired with brown dye, but is simply written over with new text. This is one of the most crudely portions of corrected text. Looks like this is method 2 being used, and method 3, where the entire text in error is scraped off and some type of black dye is added over which the text is written, and it results in an illegible text. There's one part in the text where a skin blemish on the original skin of the animal was removed from the sheet by the original tanner before the sheets were sewn together. So this is sheet 61. This is the back side. You can see it's professionally done by the tanner, by the book, the person who made the scroll. And it's outlined in ink to draw attention that this is deliberate. So it does not invalidate the text in any way, since it does not damage any text. This is the largest insect lacuna in the entire scroll. And I would imagine this took place after the scroll was taken from the synagogue, after the scroll was being used in the synagogue in its worship services, because the scroll would have been repaired by the rabbi, who would not allow this for a Sefer Torah. This would have been repaired. So this insect damage from an insect worm happened, I would suppose, after 1840, and it results in the loss of 18 letters across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines. Notice that the name, numbers 2661, was not damaged. So that is a sheer coincidence. It's interesting that this column has no tag-in over the letters. Here is an unrepaired area of skin damage. This is the first sheet of the Kansas scroll. And I believe this is where the bandit grabbed the scroll and ripped it apart. And this is the damage caused by his thumb. So I'm arguing we actually see the shape of his thumb here as he grabbed the bottom of the scroll and brutally ripped it in half. Some of the scroll portions are heavily soiled. And here is an example of moisture and other type of soiling damage to the surface of the scroll, which would not have happened while the scroll was in the synagogue. I often wonder if this is the result. These were liquid drippings that were queerly wiped off. And I'm wondering if this part of the scroll acquired by Alpha Owens, now at the University of Kansas, was in a market or a bookstore somewhere in France where she acquired it. And the scroll was open to this section. And people were walking by eating their kebabs and dripping food juices and drink juices onto it. So very unusual that one section of scroll has all different sorts of soiling damage. There's one point at which the scroll suffered water damage, and these types of liquid spills line up when you roll the scroll up, and they occurred at one point while the scroll was rolled up, and water somehow got into the scroll, and they were not cleaned. These liquid spills were not taken care of, and they resulted in staining. Of course, as we see in a lot of scrolls, we have so-called mirror letters with ink transferred to the backside of the scroll, indicating a long period of no use in which the scroll was not enrolled. And this probably happened after 1840. Finally, this research on the scroll has led to some other discoveries. Two other Torah scrolls now in France are known to have been taken from the Medea synagogue between 1830 and 1840. One scroll is in the Municipal Library of Saint-Dié, France. The file notes it was taken from Medea in 1830, brought to France by 1830 by a certain M. Boreal, captain of the French military. So here again, we have another French military individual taking antiquities out of synagogues and sending them back to France. The scroll has also suffered violence, as it is a damaged portion of 4 skin sheets. Second, another scroll is found in the Médiathèque Jean Renoir in Dieppe. The file notes it was taken from Medea in 1840. It's complete and said to be of sheepskin and in perfect condition. It was donated by a famous pharmacist in the hospital of Rouen. This information supports my suggestion that Alpha Owens acquired the Kansas half scroll in France. So it moved from Medea to France to Kansas. Finally, then, we can see that at least 3 scrolls were taken from Medea as a result of the French invasion of 1830 under similar historical, military, and political circumstances. The reference to French military personnel in relation to 2 of the scrolls indicates an interest by ranking military officers in the acquisition of items of cultural interest and perhaps monetary value. Of course, in the news at this time was the famous Rosetta Stone discovered in Egypt. So this was in the news, and these French military officers were looking for such antiquities. So there was no documentation related to these 3 scrolls indicating Algerian Sephardic Jews separated in the removal of these scrolls from Medea and in their transit to France. Scholars of Algerian Jewry may need to rethink the relation of the French military to Jews in Algeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mirecki. That was really intriguing and covered a lot of different angles, from provenance to the materiality to traditions and scribal practices. And I want to share a couple of the chat was really quite alive and kicking during the talk. So I want to focus in on a couple of the questions that were raised. Rather than read all of them, I'm going to kind of summarize some of the issues that were raised, both from your perspective. People are wondering about you reuniting these two halves of the scrolls. There's been some conversation about the legal aspects of that in antiquities laws and colonialism and the like. But I wonder if you could reflect from your perspective as a researcher about the relationship between virtually bringing these half scrolls together versus the value, if it were possible, to physically bring them together, though frankly I doubt that it is.
Yes, I have complete photographs from the chateau of the French half. And I've taken my own photographs with my cell phone, thanks to Apple, of the Kansas half. The University of Kansas is willing to take high quality photographs similar to the ones in Paris. So the scroll could be reunited digitally. The University of Kansas administration has, Tamara Falikoff has raised some interest in the university purchasing the scroll from the chateau. But knowing the people as I do at the chateau, it's unlikely that they are willing to depart with this scroll for monetary purposes or even just voluntarily free of charge. It's part of their treasure as they see it. So to get into the other issue you raise, antiquities law, issues of colonialism and that sort of thing, that would have to be looked into, and I do not have a legal background enough to comment on that. But it's certainly a possibility, and I think it would be wonderful to see the scroll reunited.
Jesse Abelman is asking about whether in the course of your research on the provenance of the scrolls, you uncovered much evidence about the collector's market for Torah scrolls prior to the late 20th century. What can we know that we didn't know before about who was buying and selling
Well,
Torah
we
scrolls of
have
this kind?
well-known documented information on the buying and selling of the Dead Sea Scrolls from Kondo on up to the state of Israel purchasing scrolls. I think there's always been an interest in antiquities, of course, but focusing primarily on Torah scrolls and any Hebrew manuscripts apart from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not familiar with the history of that market and the condition of it.
So Margie Gibson wants to know regarding the numerous repairs. I thought a Torah scroll had to be perfect, but if the mistakes are scraped off or otherwise repaired, doesn't that negate the perfection?
I think there was some leeway taken throughout Jewish communities on what sort of damage was allowed. It looked like that one vav that was erased would be no problem for most rabbis. And some of the portions that where text was removed and recopied, I think was fairly standard in certain Jewish communities. The problems with damage where sections of text were lost through physical damage or insect lacuna, I use that as evidence that this type of damage occurred after it left the Jewish community. That one insect hole would be evidence for me that it happened when it was probably in France and was not under the care of a watchful rabbi.
I could just add my own 2 cents, if you don't mind, that if I recall correctly, the laws related to mezuzot and tefillin don't allow repairs, virtually any kind of repair, but Torah scrolls have more lenient rules that do allow for repairs. Finally, there's a question which doesn't quite say who asked, but were there any columns that look to have been replaced and resewn in a non-standard manner? I think the question means, were there any columns or membranes that were completely removed and replaced entirely?
Yes, this is something I didn't notice that Ephraim Caspi brought to my attention, that there is a section of scroll, I think the beginning of the Chateau scroll, several sheets were added secondarily. So that's a major repair, and all that text was copied once again.
Okay, so it seems that we've covered the questions that have been raised in the chat. If anybody has anything else to ask, now is your final opportunity. But I do want to close up by saying, by thanking Dr. Mirecki for his work, by thanking, by implication, some of the staff at the National Library of Israel's manuscript department, Ephraim Caspi, whose expertise appears in every piece of this story, and to Daron behind the scenes and the entire culture staff, but again, particularly to Dr. Mirecki for his excellent, clear lecture on covering so many aspects of a single scroll, its history, its provenance, its writing style, its unique features, attempts to fix it, the market, the secondary market, issues of colonialism and the like, and the contemporary market. So we're left this evening with a great deal to think about, and I want to thank everybody who participated.
Thank you. And anyone who wants to contact me can contact me through the University of Kansas website. I look forward to hearing from you.
The microphones are open if anyone wants to say thank you or has any other further questions.
Yes, I'd like to thank Dr. Poe. And I also have the question, which the scroll in canvas that you've been taking care of, what animal skin is it? It's dark in color. And do you have any idea what animal skin?
I have an interesting comment on this.
Yes, please.
The file says it is camel skin, which is no. It cannot be camel skin. So this is some librarian's guess, because the sheets are very large and they're dark brown, so it must be a camel. It's most likely calf skin, perhaps antelope of some type.
Actually, North African scrolls are almost always written on gazelle or antelope skin, which does have this kind of reddish dark color.
Yeah.
So that's probably.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have one in the Israel Museum. Haven't seen it in a long time, but we're also from Algiers. I think it was on deerskin. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say that my granddaughter is in the Judaica program at the University of Kansas. And I never could believe that there could be a Judaica program in Kansas. So, and she's loving it. She's doing that with a major as well in communications. And she loves the program. Yes,
I teach in that program.
Yeah. Are you teaching there now?
No. I retired in December.
Oh, okay, because I texted her and she said she didn't know about you. So I'll say, well, you'll come across them. She loves all her professors there.
It's a very vibrant program.
Yes, how wonderful.
Good to know. I just was so shocked that it was Kansas that she chose to go to. So for Jewish stuff, that's all.
Sure.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I enjoyed this lecture very, very much.
Thank you.
So did I. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the extra dot. Was that a mistake by the scribe because he was copying off something that had dots in it, or that's actually traditional for all Torah scrolls?
It's traditional for all Torah scrolls.
Oh, so that's part of the tradition.
Yeah, it's traditional, and you can even find the dots in the Biblia Hebraica.
Is there anything unique about this scroll from a scribe perspective that's unique to its time?
I compared some of the paragraph breaks, the parashot, with what Rambam has to say about paragraph breaks. And of course, as you know, he takes Jewish scribes to task. He's very upset with them for making paragraph breaks where they want to make the paragraph breaks. And he says, follow the tradition, don't make changes. And we find that in this scroll, that the paragraph breaks do not always occur where he would want them. And I've charted some of that in my study as I've gone.
Tunisian scribes? Is that like...
Good question. That's something to look into. Ephraim may know.
I had a question.
Yes.
What Gentile would be smart enough, thief, to split the Torah scroll exactly in half?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be more likely that a Jew would have torn it in half? Unless it suggests the time of year that it was torn and it had been last used.
Well, I've thought through the various options. One is that the scroll was already rolled up with equal halves when it was in the Torah cabinet in the synagogue. And when they took it out, it was already, as they partially opened it, it was already in the middle. The second is that the bandits who tore it in half could not read Hebrew, probably didn't know what it was. And they decided between the two of them that they get equal amounts of the scroll. So however it was rolled up, they unrolled it and re-rolled it so that they would both get the same amount of their product that they're going for. So that, there are only options. We have no way to understand why they tore it right down the middle.
My second question is, you made reference to panels which do not have crowns. This suggests the transfer of the synagogue, of the scroll, from a Ashkenazi synagogue. The repair work was then done at the expense of a Sephardic synagogue. And I think that's rather unusual that in Algeria they should have, or the original exemplar they're working off of in Algeria was a Sephardi scroll, but the repair, I would assume, being done at a later time, ends up being Sephardi.
Well, I assume it's a Sephardi scroll. With the history, the history of Jewish communities from Spain into Algiers. Algeria.
Why do you have crowns? If the Sephardi tradition is to not have crowns.
Yeah, somehow the Ashkenazi scroll or scribe was involved. It's another one of these puzzling questions. And I think my research is going to raise more questions and provide solutions.
Thank you all once more for being here. Thank you all once more for being here. Thank you, Dr. Mirecki. Thank you, Dr. Finkelman. Have a good evening, good afternoon, and we'll see you all in our next event.
Okay, thank you very much.